morning, brethren.
Good morning.
Right. I was thinking about a joke to give, but I couldn't think of any. It's just that when Jordan reached home and told his wife why he reached home late, she said that excuse sounds fishy. Alright, so in Matthew 13 we have several parables that Jesus Christ spoke to his disciples and those who followed him. And today I want to look at one, the wheat and the tares. Now the reason why tares is written in T-E-A-R-S is for a reason. Because we would realize that the tares would eventually be in tares. Okay? So let's all turn to Matthew chapter 13. And we start reading from verses 24 down to verse 30. I'll be reading from the New International Version. And Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the weeds and went away. When the weeds sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, did you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" And the enemy did this, he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, first, collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn." Now, one thing about some of the parables is that Jesus explained what he meant to the disciples. So, this parable, he gave an explanation, and let's go down to verses 36 to 43 to get that explanation. Same chapter. And he was giving them the explanation, so I'll begin at verse 37. He answered, "The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man," speaking about himself. "The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom, or the first fruits. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels." So he explained what he had used in the parable above. "As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. So at the end of the age, the Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of tears. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears, let them hear." So, brethren, we could see that this parable is applicable to us, the people who God has called the first fruits. And as we look to celebrate Pentecost next week, Sunday, or also known as the Feast of the First Fruits, we have some lessons to learn. So let's see what are some of the lessons that we can learn from this parable that Christ gave. One, and this is a very important lesson, there's great similarity between and resemblance between the wheat and the tares. And we read this in verses 28 and 29, so if you just look at it, you will see, the servant said to him, "Do you want us then to go and gather them up?" And he said, "No, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the the wheat were dead. And if you look here, on the left is wheat while it is growing, before it reaches the mature stage. And on the right is darnel or false wheat that we call tares. The word that they use there for tares is darnel or false wheat. And if you look at them closely, you see that there's a great resemblance between the wheat and the tares. So, it means therefore that within the body, one may have a hard time distinguishing between wheat and the tares as they are growing. Christ himself said so. He said you will know the difference, and before maturity, the wheat and the tares are so similar that you may root out the wheat with the tares because of how they look. Secondly, God is concerned that uprooting the tares might uproot the wheat. So the reason why he said, don't go and root out the tares, is because he doesn't want to lose any of the wheat, any of the so-called called out ones, any of the first fruits. So he said, don't go and root out any wheat, any tares, because you may endanger, we run the risk of you rooting out the wheat. I am concerned about my wheat. Let my wheat grow. Okay? And what happens too is that the weeding out of the tares would also endanger the healthy growing of the wheat. If you have a field with tares and wheat, and sometimes when you go and weed plants, you loosen the soil and the roots of the plant that you want to keep. And what you find happening afterwards is that the plant that you left would die after a few days because you have already loosened the soil. You may have interfered with the root structure so that the plant cannot grow healthily as it should have. And the lesson for us today is that God is protecting his called and chosen ones. That's the only reason why he said don't go and root out the tares, because he doesn't want anyone to interfere with the wheat or the called out ones. And then we go to the third point that we can gather from this. Both are allowed to grow until the harvest, until maturity. Why? For a simple reason. If you look there, at the top there, you will see that the wheat, the kernels, you get it at the top of the plant. And this part at the top of the plant is called a spike, or you might call it the ear or the hair. And it forms at the top of all mature wheat plants. And within that kernel, you will get about 30 or 40 wheat grains based on the type of wheat that you have. And the insightful point about this is that the fruits distinguish the wheat from the tares. And interestingly, the fruit is seen at the top, so it is so easy to distinguish the wheat, because from the time you see them from a distance, you will see the fruits that they have produced. So you will know which one is a wheat at maturity. You won't have any indecision or indecisiveness about wondering whether this is a wheat or a tare, because all you have to do is look at the fruit. And of course, it is at the top, so it's so easily distinguishable that you'll be able to know that this one is a wheat and this one is a tare. And it leads us to a question for each one of us. Are our fruits easily seen by others? So there's a question that we have to ponder. Can people see our fruits easily? And because that is how the wheat would be distinguished. The fruits at the top and spine. Alright, so let's move to point number 4. And interestingly, point number 4 is only specialized harvesters, the angels, were allowed to remove the tares. Imagine that. The tares are removed by the angels at the end of the age. We read this in These are specialized workers who are tasked with the removal of the tares. The general workers were not allowed to remove the tares. Verses 27 to 29 tells us that. And we learn that God is the one who assigns his harvesters to remove the tares. But growing up in church, I grew up in the Church of God. We also, and I have had many experiences, and I have had experiences of people who took on this job, who felt that they are the ones to sift out wheat and tares in the congregation. But I don't think that is the job that God has called us for. The job he has called us for is to produce fruit and not to uproot tares. He would do that. He promised that he would do that before the end. The parable says so. Christ explained that in the explanation. So therefore, we should be focusing on ourselves to grow fruit. And finally, the last point, the wheat must guard against losing its quality. Guard against dangers of cross-pollination. So in my hand, I have 2 peppers, what you might call pimento. Unfortunately, one is hot and one is not. I can't tell by looking at the color, or I can't tell by smelling because they smell the same. I can only tell when I cut it and I put it by my eye, or when I put it in the food and taste it, then you can tell whether it was hot or not. So one day I was speaking to a farmer and asked him, how come you get hot pimentos and you get pimentos that are not hot? And he was saying, if you plant pimentos close to a field of hot peppers, cross-pollination takes place, and that is why your pimentos will come out hot. And the same thing happens with wheat. I was reading about wheat planted and wheat harvested, and they plant wheat close together because wheat is wind pollinated and cell pollinated. So therefore they don't want that the wheat crop to be interfered with by other species of wheat. They always want the best quality. So that is why wheat is planted so closely together as we see in this field, so that the quality would not be compromised. The lesson for us today is that we have to guard against cross-pollination. We have to ensure that we maintain the highest quality in our lives. We cannot allow cross-pollination to take place and slowly erode the quality of spiritual life that we have because we are surrounded by tares. So that's a full-time job that we have to take on to guard against cross-pollination, because eventually our fruits would be affected. And how do we do this? How do we ensure that we produce good fruit? Let's turn to John 15. And we start to read it verse 5 and go down to verse 8. And Jesus Christ is speaking here. He says, I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me, and I in him, bears much fruit. So we have to abide in him. For without me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is cast out as a branch, which will eventually happen, and is withered. And they gather and throw them into the fire, similar to what we read in the parable. And they are burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, you will ask what you desire, and it shall be done for you. By this my Father is glorified. So if we want to glorify God, we have to do this, that you bear much fruit, so you will be my disciples. So if we are concerned about glorifying God, we should be bearing much fruit. And what are the fruits that are expected? I'll just read them for you. The Bible is filled with a lot of examples, but I'll just read from Galatians 5, verses 22 to 23 from the New King James Version. And we have some here. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Of course, this list is not exhaustible. So as you read and study, you will see and discover more fruits of the Spirit. So we need to be producing these fruits if we want to glorify God. These are just some of the fruits that we need to produce. And in conclusion, let me just review the points that we looked at. There's a similarity between wheat and tares. We have to remember that. Once they are growing, you can't tell the difference. They resemble. I remember tares, the example of the tares that they use in the Bible is darnel or false wheat. God, second point, God is concerned that uprooting the tares would affect or uproot the wheat. That's his concern. You're not concerned about the tares, but you're concerned about uprooting the wheat. Both are allowed to grow until the harvest. Why? When fruits are easily seen, so you'll be able to distinguish easily. 4, only angels, specialized workers, are allowed to remove the tares. Others are supposed to be concerned about producing fruit. And finally, only the best quality wheat are chosen for replanting. So we have to be concerned about cross-pollination affecting the quality of our fruits. So as I leave today, I just want to ask one question. What fruits are we producing?